Hello and welcome to part 13 of this tutorial on how to create a full-stack website using MongoDB, Express, React, and Node. In this part, we'll create a custom form component and start working on the login screen. So let's get started. In the source folder, create a components folder, create another folder named form field. In there, create an index.js and a formfield.module.css file. Inside of the index, I'll create a basic functional component and name it formField. Pass in props. Then we need to destructure from props. So pull label, type, config, value, and changed out of props. With the let keyword, set input element to null. The input element is what we'll return at the end. Give the div a class name of classes.input. Inside that, create a label and give it a class name of classes.label. Pass in some JSX containing the label. Then after that, pass in the input element in JSX. Above the return, create a switch statement. It will switch based off the type. The first case will be input. If we get that, we'll set the input element to some parentheses containing an input. Give it a class name of classes.text. Pass down everything in config with the spread operator. Set value to the value we get from props. And set onChange to changed. After the parentheses, break to end the case. The next case will be a text area. So we'll set the input element to a text area with a class name of classes.text. Pass everything from config. Set value to value. And onChange to changed. Add a break. Now create the default. Set the input element to some parentheses containing an input. Give it a class name of classes.text. Pass down config. Set value to value. And onChange to changed. Now import the classes object from formfield.module.css. We're done here, so let's create the style. Add an input class. Give it a width of 100%. Padding of 10 pixels. And box sizing of border box. Create a label class. Give it a font weight of bold. Display of block. And margin bottom of 8 pixels. Create a text class. Give it an outline of none. A border of 1 pixel solid with a light gray color, so CCC. Set the background color to F2, F2, F2. The font size to 1.1 rem. the padding to 10 pixels top, 0 pixels right, 10 pixels bottom, 10 pixels left, width to 95%, margin to 10 pixels top and bottom, 0 left and right, and give it a border radius of 7 pixels. When the text is focused, we'll set the background color to CCC. Now to start working on the login screen. Import useState and useEffect from React. Import useDispatch and useSelector from React-Redux. Import login from the user actions in our store. Import the form field component we just created. And I'll import the classes object for later. Pass in props. Then destructure and pull history out of props. Create a dispatch constant and set it to useDispatch. Now to create some state for the form. So create an array type constant, pass in form state, and set form state. Form state is where the state is held, and set form state is what we'll call to change it. Set that to useState. Pass in an object. Set email to an empty string, and do the same for password. Now create a user login constant where we'll call the useSelector method to access global state. Create an arrow function with state as an argument and set it to state.userLogin. Destructure user info from user login. Next, create a form config constant and set it to an object. There, we'll set up each input's config. Set email to an object. In there, set the type to input. Set config to an object containing a type of email and a placeholder of your email. Copy email down. Rename it to password. Change the config type to text and the placeholder to your password. Next, create a form elements constant and set it to an empty array. Create a for loop that will run for each key in form state. Inside the body, we'll push the setup information onto the form elements array. So push an object where we'll set the ID to key and setup to form config with key as the index. Now give the div a class name of classes.screen_container. Pass in a form tag. Give it an onSubmit attribute and set it to submit handler. Now we'll create the submit handler. Create a constant and set it to an arrow function. Pass in e for event. Then in the body, call e.preventDefault. And that's it for now. Inside the form tag, open some JSX. We'll map through the form elements So pass an arrow function into map, where we set the form element to some parentheses containing a form field component. Give it a key prop and set it to form element.id. Set the type to form element.setup.type. Set the config to form element.setup.config. The value to form element.value. Set changed to an arrow function, where we set event to the input changed handler, which we're about to create. Pass in the event and the form element.id. Now above the submit handler, create an input changed handler arrow function, passing in event and input identifier as arguments. Before we continue, under the form tag, add a button with a type of submit, displaying submit. Above the JSX, add an H2 displaying administrator login. Now back to the change handler. Inside the body, we'll call for each on the form elements. Pass in an arrow function where we set the form element to an object. Inside the body, run an if check to see if the input identifier is equal to the form element.id, which should be the case for the field we're manipulating. Inside the body of the if check, we'll call setFormState and pass in an object. Use the spread operator to pass in the contents of formState. Then with the input identifier inside some brackets, set that to the event.target.value, and we're done with the input changed handler. Now in the submit handler, dispatch the login action, then pass in formState.email and formState.password. And that's it. Thanks for watching.